C'est moi, je crois. Mute, mute, mute. Ah.
Um, Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first conference in a series of 6 planned so far on neglected crisis, not forgotten, the case of Sudan. Online, I see people are still registering. Let me have a look. I'm sorry, I need to put these glasses on for in order to be able to see. We have at the moment 35 people registered online. Well, who are online, we have more that are registered, so hopefully people will join still as we go. We had just before in a small group here with some colleagues and some guests in our office in Brussels, the pleasure of having some témoignage of 2 of our doctors who were present in Khartoum at the beginning of this open war. And we had just a small background, but we won't come back to this, as this conference is not about giving an overall geopolitical context or cause and effect explanations. Our concern today is really that we want to put a spotlight on Sudan because we believe it needs it, it deserves it. The situation is critical, is complex, and is far from over. So here online, we will have 5 speakers. We have an ambitious agenda. We have 2 women from Sudan who will share their story. I'll briefly introduce them afterwards. And then we have 3 colleagues of MSF who will share their perspective. Then we will have a brief moment for some questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A, right? In the Q&A section. And I forgot to mention, there is translation for people who need it. The French, if you go at the bottom, you see 3 dots, click on those, and there you will see interprétation, or depending on the settings of your computer, of course. And if you look for Dutch, you have to click on Korean. It's just good to know. It is there, but it isn't advertised as such. So we will see where we get. We'll try to keep time. At 6 o'clock, we should be finished normally. If we don't manage to answer all your questions, we're committed with the speakers to address them afterwards and share with you the answer. We will record the session, but as you can see, you as guests online or in this office still, you are not visible. So it is just the content of the speakers that is being recorded. So normally there shouldn't be any difficulties or issues with that. Then I propose to just go straight to the presentation of our speakers. I'll provide a short bio, but I think it's important we share with you who the speakers are. We have Rim Abbas, who maybe you can give a short wave so people see. Yeah, hi Rim, good to see you
Hello.
again.
Thank you so much.
So Rim is a Sudanese author, researcher, and feminist activist. She is part of the women's movement in Sudan as a former member of the coordinating committee of Sudanese women's civic and political groups. She is currently a non-resident researcher at the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Politics. She is also the author of Undoing Resistance, Authoritarianism and Attacks on the Arts in Sudan's 30 Years of Islamist Rule. Sorry. Reem, where are you currently calling in from?
Yes, I'm currently in Egypt.
Egypt.
I left with my family a few weeks
Okay.
into the conference. Conflict.
So thank you, Reem, and welcome. Our next speaker is Sarah Abbas, not related. Sarah, can you? Yeah, I see you there. Sarah is a political scientist and researcher on the intersection of development, peace building, gender, and social movements. Most recently, she worked as a senior coordinator of the Sudan Crisis Coordination Unit at Shabaka Social Enterprise. She has been working in and on Sudan since 2004. Sarah has a master's degree from the University of Cambridge. And you are currently calling in from where?
Berlin, Germany.
Berlin. Okay, just nice to know. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Then we have Marie Burton. Hi, Marie. See you there. Marie is emergency coordinator with Doctors Without Borders, and she has been on board of our medical train in Ukraine. She has worked in the squats of Brussels and in many other humanitarian aid efforts. In recent months, she not only managed MSF's nursing activities from Khartoum, but also worked as a nursing staff at the Bashir Teaching Hospital in Khartoum. She witnessed the consequences of the war on the people of Sudan firsthand. And we're very happy you're now sharing your time with us as you're very busy also with Gaza. And I think you're calling in from somewhere in Belgium, home due to strikes. Then we have Michiel Hoffman, who's there as well. He is our senior humanitarian specialist with Doctors Without Borders, worked with MSF since 93 in many different capacities in different countries as coordinator, head of mission, and from Liberia to Bosnia to Kosovo. I'm not going to name the whole list. Many different contexts. And between missions, Michiel returned to his former career as a freelance journalist as well. He is a co-founder of the Antares Foundation, which is a Dutch non-profit organization that supports local NGOs in providing psychosocial support to staff working in stressful environments. And between January 2009 and January 2011, Michiel was MSF's country representative in Afghanistan, based in Kabul, where he oversaw the return of MSF activities after 5 years' absence. Since 2011, Michiel has worked, as I mentioned at the beginning, as a senior humanitarian specialist and is based in Belfast. Complex contexts are nothing new for Michiel. Then we have here in the room with us Shazir, who's, maybe you can just give it for the people online who haven't met you yet. Shazir is a referencer of surgical care for OCB. This is the operational center of Brussels, with a specialization in war surgery. A decade of collaboration with Doctors Without Borders in some of the most challenging conflict zones worldwide, with expertise in critical assignments in Yemen, Syria, Sudan, South Sudan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan. So also lots of different experience. Thank you all, esteemed speakers and panelists. We will just have a first round where the speakers will take turns to bring their perspective and they will share with us how they want to contribute to engage in the conversation on Sudan as a neglected, not forgotten crisis. We will start with Reem and then go to Sarah, and then we'll have Michiel, Marie, and end with Shazir. So, Reem, please go ahead, and you know how much or how little time you have. Let's all try
Absolutely.
to keep it so we can come back if we have extra time. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I hope my network doesn't fail me. It seems that there was some echo. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again. And I am very happy to be here with you. And I'm just going to share some of my thoughts and just to kind of help people understand why this conflict happened, what has led to this moment. Maybe this will give us a better idea of how we can, work, all of us can work collectively on ending this brutal conflict. So war has been inevitable. I saw it coming. We all saw it coming. It doesn't mean that we were ready for it, but we did see it coming. As you know, in 2018, 2019, Sudanese protesters took to the streets to resist the rule of Omar al-Bashir. And as a result, al-Bashir's rule, or al-Bashir himself, was ousted in a military coup. After that, the protesters continued to protest for what we saw as, a valid quest, for democracy and freedom for the Sudanese people. What happened is the constitutional declaration, which was, of course, spearheaded by, the African Union in 2019 to kind of resolve the political crisis and the political vacuum in Sudan, really was problematic. So the constitutional declaration, which brought the government of Dr. Abdullah Hamdok to power and a whole transitional cabinet, it was problematic for many reasons, but chiefly because it legitimized the Rapid Support Forces as a separate force. The Rapid Support Forces, which was started by Omar al-Bashir himself years earlier to fight against the rebel groups in Darfur and beyond, was a militia, basically. And for it to be legitimized as a separate force was very problematic. It continued to grow after 2019 because it marketed itself as a supporter of the revolution. And Burhan, who's the leader of the army, continued to use the RSF to scare the army to save his own self. And the Freedom and Change Coalition, which is, as you know, the main political coalition at the time, it embraced the RSF to scare the army, because they viewed the RSF as a force without an ideology, hence enabling them to kind of use it to their own benefit. So, so this is where all the problems started. So after we established that the declaration was problematic, it created a hybrid military civilian governance structure that has failed in many countries around the world. But in Sudan specifically, with the very complicated history of war and ethnic dimensions, it was very complicated. So we had a transitional government, Dr. Abdullah Hamdok, very weak and indecisive, unfortunately, and was unable to deal with the legacy of the Islamist or the former regime. The FFC was also part of the issue because they were unable to translate the agreed upon Declaration of Freedom and Change into a political vision. Abdullah Hamdok had lived abroad for decades, so he didn't have the network on the ground and didn't really understand the different dynamics, And all of this is really important to say, because I really wanted to understand how this kind of materialized and how the conflict began, because it didn't start just with the first bullet. It had a foundation, that was there for years. From the side of the military, the generals benefited from being in power because their military investment, industrial sectors, and to have military power would give them would ensure that their interests are there and would ensure that they don't face justice, which is very important for them. So many problems happened. The military was able to fraction the FFC, of course, because it was also a very weak coalition, because any coalition that works on the minimum agenda becomes very weak. So we had a situation where the 2021 coup was inevitable. The 2021 coup was marketed by the military, surprisingly, as a coup to, stop the country from plunging into a civil war. surprisingly. So the military failed to consolidate power through this coup, okay? So then we had the framework agreement, which was brought again by the international community as a way to salvage the country and bridge the gap that was created by the coup. I can talk a lot about how the process was not exclusive, because also the international community saw that the FFC is the representative of the people. But let's talk about what are the issues within the framework agreement that really kind of pushed this war, or was the straw that broke the camel's back. So the framework agreement again refused to deal with the elephant in the room, which is having two armies. Any country that has two armies, this is a recipe for war, a recipe for disaster. And the idea of accommodating the RSF temporarily just does not work. So in fact, the agreement gave the RSF ample time to integrate into the national army. And this would have just kind of led to it to expand even more. So the framework agreement was good for the RSF, was good for the political elites. It was not good for Sudan in general, in the short and in the long term. So the war could have started in 2019. It could have started after that. So it was going to happen anyways. But of course, there are internal and regional dynamics that kind of pushed the war to start. Other than the framework agreement, we also have to understand that what happened on April 15th was a coup. It happened because there were regional and national dynamics. It was a coup led by the RSF, as I may say. The financial networks of the RSF started to reap less benefits, making the war a necessary objective if the framework agreement was not signed. Why? Because the RSF, which benefited a lot from the Yemen war and sending mercenaries to the Yemen war, the dynamics of the Yemen war changed. They needed less soldiers. It had diminishing access to gold exports. So many things became clear that they had to go and fight this war, especially when the coup failed. So this war, which is waged by the Dagalo brothers, fueled by nomadic communities who are minorities across different countries in the Sahel, it's of course, it's a complete demographic change process, because what's happening is, imagine if someone comes and lives in your house, drives your car, wears your clothes, and tells you that you're never coming back home. This is what's happening to the people of Khartoum and people in many parts of Darfur. According to recent statistics by a think tank, there were about 10.7 million residents in Khartoum in April. Now there are 2.5 million. There were 1.9 million occupied houses in Khartoum in April. Now less than 500,000 are occupied. So this is a fight for land, a fight over resources, a fight due to the impoverishment of nomadic communities in the Sahel region. It's not just a power struggle between two generals. If someone says that, you have to correct them. This fight has historical, social, ethnic undertones, and also a result of colonial fragmentations from the 19th century. So it is a very big issue. But then you had immediate reasons that kind of led to the start of this conflict. But for it to be sustained, there's so many political discourses and narratives that have historical roots, that have roots in the fight between the nomadic and the farming communities and so on. So I don't want to take a lot of time, but the last thing I want to say is civil society, although it was centralized, it has been doing a lot to support the people in different parts of Sudan. It is trying to rebuild, and it is trying to get over infrastructural issues such as bank transfers and so on. And they have been able to adapt, and we have seen local initiatives that are trying to kind of bridge the gap and almost play the role of the local authority in some places. Sarah Abbas will talk more about that, but I just wanted to end on this positive note, basically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reem, for giving that background information and highlighting the complexity. Sarah, I think we can move straight to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have very much to add to what Reem said. I think what's important that in the process that she's describing is to really pay attention to the successive waves of conflict and the successive waves of displacement. So while we're talking about this crisis starting in April, of course, millions of people who are affected within it have already been displaced and have already been impoverished through previous crises. And this also includes, of course, refugees from countries that are neighboring Sudan and who are really not being paid very much attention to within this crisis. I'll leave it at that, and then we can pick up the discussion a bit later when we speak about civil society.
Okay, thanks you, Sarah. We'll definitely come back to that. Michiel, the word is yours.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick note. I'm on this panel because at the moment I am the desk for the MSF OCB operations in Sudan. So I really want to concentrate on what we see from an operational point of view of the humanitarian consequences of this ongoing and continuous war and violence, because it hasn't really stopped the fighting since it started in April. The first, there's the violence itself, affecting by and large three large areas. Of course, Darfur is one of the most affected regions here. And the ongoing violence has escalated again in the last month or so. Just as an example, Niala, that is the second biggest city, millions of residents, was taken over by RSF around a month ago, with a lot of destruction, displacement, looting. The market was burned down. One of the hospitals was completely ransacked. So it's a daily lived reality for still millions and millions of people in Darfur. Access for bringing in humanitarian aid is extremely limited, mainly because of the violence. It's ourselves and others mainly come in cross-border from Chad. And is controlled by local militia and RSF, so it's not so much administrative restrictions, but security that prevents scaling up, which would be needed for MSF. The main operations are still hanging on in two cities, in Al Fasher, in East Darfur, and in Al Janina, which is close to the border with Chad, and is now fully controlled by RSF, and is therefore accessible for humanitarian assistance. In the rest of Darfur, there are some ad hoc activities, some remote support, some quick in and out actions, but security and continued fighting and aggression by different militia prevents the scaling up there that is necessary. The other area in that part of the country, Kordofan, is increasingly affected by the violence, which is almost totally inaccessible. There is almost none of international actors able or willing to access these regions. There's also a city there, El Obeid, which is controlled by the government, but now surrounded by RSF forces. That's another million plus people that have effectively been cut off from international assistance. We are trying, but it's a difficult situation. And then Khartoum itself, already highlighted by Reem, which is where the whole conflict started. A city of 10 million people, indeed estimates of less than 3 million left, but that is still 3 million people, and a lot of them very vulnerable people, people that didn't have the opportunity, the means, or the security to leave the city, and a lot of them migrants who are displaced themselves from previous conflicts. Are still living there. This has been under effective medical, and it now looks more like a humanitarian blockade for 3 months now by Sudanese armed forces, because most of Khartoum is controlled by RSF forces. MSF is still operating there, but has to continuously reduce operations because we're being choked off from medical supplies, and they're simply running out, and also choked off of bringing in medical staff, surgeons, and others, because we're being refused permission to bring in any medical staff. So that is a critical situation, and again, the fighting didn't stop in Khartoum in April or May. It is still an ongoing reality for everybody that lives there every day. This includes airstrikes, shelling, and gunfire in many different areas of Khartoum and its twin city on the other side of the river in Omdurman. In Khartoum, inexplicably, because it used to be quite accessible from May till the end of August, besides MSF and the Italian NGO Emergency, in terms of international aid, nobody else came to the assistance of the remaining population in Khartoum. So it's what we call a humanitarian desert. Now, the problems, of course, don't stop in the RSF-controlled areas, although they are the most violent and most difficult to reach. Because of displacement alone, the official figures now of the displacement make it already the biggest displacement at this moment in time in the world, but are very conservative. We talk about 6 million people displaced and 1.5 million of them refugees to other countries. But a simple math from what Riem just explained, if Khartoum alone was 10 million people, it's now down to less than 3 million. That's already 7 million from Khartoum alone. So there's a lot of displacement unaccounted for in those unofficial figures as well. And many of those displaced in the states still controlled by the government, in White Nile, in Gedaref, in Jazeera state, live in really atrocious conditions, often displaced, makeshift displaced settlement with very bad sanitation, very problematic access to healthcare, etc., etc. So the displacement crisis in itself is huge and is growing. New displaced are arriving every day. Same for the surrounding countries, Chad being by far the biggest. I think it's close to 500,000 or so of people in different camps. New people still arriving in Chad, and just a sheer amount of people, and this is a very arid, remote region of Chad, are running out of food and running out of water just to take care of the refugees. Similar scenes in South Sudan, especially in Renk, but also in Awil and other areas, and even in Central Africa, there is an influx of refugees. This all in a context where you see the impact now of what is effectively the decapitation of an entire state, where from one day to the next, the state capital has been taken out of the equation. The country is divided in half. So the long-term consequences of that, a slow but sure breakdown of health services, because they're running out of supplies, running out of staff, running out of money. You see nutrition effects because some of the main agricultural regions in Sudan are in Kordofan and in Darfur. So malnutrition is going up, and simply just the infrastructure breaking down, such as water supply, leading to already several severe outbreaks of cholera, but also other communicable diseases are starting to peak in several regions, simply because the basic infrastructure and living conditions are no longer there. And this is all likely to continue to deteriorate as long as the fighting continues, and the systemic breakdown of Sudan as a state is now showing its effect also on the population as a whole. So it's a grim picture, and extremely difficult indeed to also keep the attention of the world on this massive humanitarian disaster that at the moment has no indicators of getting better. To quite the opposite, that it's getting worse.
Thank you, Michiel, for this sobering update. We'll go straight to Marie Burton and Shazir Majid with some personal stories of when you, or whichever part that you want to add to this perspective. Marie, you go first, please.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay, perfect. So as you say, I've been for 2 months in Sudan. So I was supposed to go beginning of June. I had to wait 2 months to get my visa. Like, it's not only MSF, it's not only me, it's all of the humanitarian people who want to go there. Some never get the visa and other has to wait months. And then when we are there, we have to wait a travel permit to travel from a state to another one. Sometimes we are blocked, sometimes we have for 1 week. So all of the access in each state are very difficult. And then once in Khartoum, so MSF has an hospital in the south of Khartoum, who is now in the RSF control area. And from there also we have to stay in the hospital. Almost the access to healthcare for the population is really difficult also, because only the secondary health of care are working, but with really difficulty of access. And the medical supply is coming from Port Sudan or from Damazin. They need also the travel permit to send the supply. And for now, MSF, we are stuck since beginning of September without any supply for the hospital. So we had to leave the hospital because we are not able to work due to the lack of supply. We receive a lot of people there. We work with local staff mainly, who was not part of the hospital before. So it's volunteer from the community or medical staff who just came to support their people and to stay. They have faced a lot of challenge also, because they have been looted during the night. And do you hear me?
We hear you. There's somebody somewhere, sound in the background, but continue, Marie.
Okay. So yeah, the medical staff are still there in a limited number, but they continue to work there to try to support their people. But there is still a lot of population in the south, in the neighborhood, call it Mayo, because it's a vulnerable population who doesn't have the means to leave. So they have to stay there and to face the lack of food, to face the violence every day, and to face the aggression and the looted every day. We in the hospital also we receive a lot of sexual violence. The military troop go inside the house and they rape the woman in front of the whole family. So we receive a lot of cases that we care with international staff and local staff also. Then after that, the local staff, they have been treated by the military because we are treating the sexual violence. So it's a situation very tricky, and the access of care is really difficult. Mikil was speaking also about the million of internal displaced people who are in different states. In general, they are not welcome in the state. We cannot call the place where they stay camp. The authority want that we call that gathering point, because they expect that the displaced will not stay. So we are not able, and other organizations are not able neither to improve the condition of the camp. We don't have the authorization because the authority doesn't want to come. So people are really living in bad condition. We need any sanitation, and within the same camp, there is a big difference also between the Sudanese population and the South Sudanese population. So the South Sudanese population, they are living in a worse condition. It's really obvious in the same gathering point. The access to care is difficult also because the lack of money, but it's the lack of transportation to reach the healthcare center also. And we had to face this problem a lot of time, that we had to refer the patient to hospital, but they don't have the money. So the general situation is really decreasing. Malnutrition, cholera. We had to face also a big measles outbreak because there is no access to the vaccine neither, and the routine vaccination that all of the child under 5 should receive, they don't have. So in the beginning of the conflict in the White Nile, in some camp, the people was counting like every day 10 new burial for child under 5 due to the measles. So yeah, the situation is really difficult. I will let Shazir speak about the trauma cases that he had to face in the hospital.
Thank you so much, Marie, for sharing this. And Shazir, we'll ask you to be brief. We know you will be to the point and pass your messages.
All right. I close. I want to, with my closing tip, I just want to share an experience. So we had this very young woman, might be in her late 30s, who comes in with a gunshot wound to her upper body. And we asked what happened, right? So she's the mother of three. Her youngest child is a female breast who's still being breastfed. And they were sleeping in their room when a bullet struck them through the window. And they had played no part in this whatsoever. And this is just one of the millions of examples of the people who are caught in the conflict, in the crossfire, and also who are being weaponized for the geographic location of where they live. If they are in the RSF location or in a SAF location, which shouldn't be the reality. And bottom line is everyone is suffering, mainly the civilians, both physical and mental, and we are not even being allowed to do the basic minimum requirements to support them. I would stop.
Thank you. That's a lot to take in on a context that we know is difficult, but still when we take a moment and really listen to what this means, it's very enormous. And as the speaker said earlier, it's very frustrating as well to observe that, be in front of that. One point I think that we would like to hear as well, and I think Sarah, you referred to it as well, is what is happening on the ground. We've seen the perspective, the background, we've seen the perspective from MSF, what we see, what we can do, and our challenges and our limitations, what we cannot do. But how is the population coping, and what is civil society doing in that? And what would you like to add on to that, as you referred to earlier? So Sarah, the word is yours.
Thank you very much. I think quite a bit has already been said. And what I really want to focus on is the fact that, from my perspective, one of the neglected, or rather invisibilized, aspect of this crisis is the role of civil society and of communities in Sudan. When we talk about humanitarian deserts, I mean, the question comes up of, who is stepping into this breach? Who is it that is responding really to the day-to-day needs of the communities, particularly in those areas where the international humanitarian organizations are not present, are not able to access for multiple reasons. In essentially much of the country, the international humanitarian response is marginal in comparison to the vast and diverse array of local organizations, of local initiatives that are working, sometimes in very heroic ways, within the impacted communities. And they are supported by the communities themselves to the extent that the communities can support. And in some cases, depending on where, what kind of access and networks exist, they're also supported by diaspora donations and remittances. To say that is, of course, not to imply that the local response is adequate. It's woefully inadequate, given really the depth and the scope of the crisis that was just shared by MSF colleagues. This is partly this kind of inadequate responses, partly because Sudanese civil society itself has been really deeply impacted by the crisis. And it hasn't received in the last 7 months the kind of attention or sustained support that would be needed to help it respond better to the crisis. In the very short time that I have, I want to start very briefly with giving a kind of glimpse of the situation of the national NGOs to start with. So The national NGOs, including the ones that have experience with humanitarianism at various points, were, as I mentioned, really impacted by the conflict. And this is really because most national NGOs had their main offices, sometimes their only offices actually, in the capital, Khartoum. And so when the fighting intensified, they lost access to their premises, to their equipment, to their vehicles, and often to their bank accounts, as well as the banking sector collapsed. Most importantly, many of them lost communication with their staff, with their own staff, who, of course, were forced to flee or who became, disconnected in terms of, the telecommunications network. In addition, many of the national NGOs lost their sources of funding as sort of development-oriented type of funds were frozen. Some of them had already been frozen after the coup of October 2021. And these NGOs really didn't have much access to existing mechanisms of coordination with international NGOs. Some NGOs managed, however, since in the last 7 months to reposition themselves. Those are mainly NGOs who had field offices or sort of long-running programs and engagement in regions outside Khartoum, and particularly in regions where there isn't active conflict. In some cases, the NGOs have even managed to open new field offices in areas like Al Jazeera and River Nile State, which, if you know Sudan, these are not areas that are, thought of traditionally as hubs of humanitarian action, but have become so because of they're hosting massive numbers of IDPs. And of course, working in these new areas is not easy, not the least because, just logistical issues like rents are through the roof. And it also requires dealing, of course, with the Humanitarian Affairs Commission, which is quite difficult. Some of these NGOs have also formed partnerships with international organizations, international NGOs, and local initiatives to, for example, deliver cash assistance to people in Darfur and in Khartoum. But still, their impact is still quite limited, because even those NGOs that are adjusting and responding, they are not, they're lacking in the support. And of course, they face in many ways the same access problems that the international NGOs are facing. More importantly, even than the NGOs, are what we call in Sudan, like the youth and popular initiatives. So these are not registered organizations, but they're initiatives that are built on a very long tradition of mutual aid in Sudanese society. And they have experience, especially over the last 10 years, sort of lessons of dealing with cholera outbreaks, with flooding disasters, the COVID-19 pandemic, outbreaks of violence, depending on the area. And so many of them are, not registered organizations, or most of them, I should say, but they're kind of volunteer hubs. So Marie already spoke about the important role of the volunteers, including the medical volunteers, for example, in, Bishair or Al-Turki, some of the remaining hospitals in Khartoum. One important initiative that I need to mention in this regard is the emergency response rooms. So these are, neighborhood level volunteer hubs. They were established in Khartoum state and in other parts of the country in the weeks following the outbreak of conflict in April. And basically, they mobilize volunteers to help the local community on different aspects, trying to provide some basic medical assistance or help transport people, in some cases where possible, to hospitals, depending on the situation, the proximity of a kind of health center or health facility, and also in some cases trying to provide food through mechanisms like a shared kitchen. And in other areas, for example, like in Khartoum and Al Jineina, in other places in the country, also trying on some level to help with evacuation. Not so much in Al Jineina because the violence was so intense there that there aren't ERs functioning in this way. Since April, the ERs have become very visible in Sudan, and in some areas like Khartoum, they are a very important, I would say, humanitarian player, given this lack of engagement there. They've been getting quite a bit of attention in recent months, but they're not really receiving a lot of support yet. This kind of support hasn't materialized yet. And it's really also important to say that there's a protection crisis, which I think, you know, hasn't been highlighted enough, but it's been mentioned a couple of times. But there are, you know, these volunteers and these health workers are facing, you know, enforced disappearances, getting picked up by security services or getting picked up by the RSF, injuries and death and sexual violence as well in the process of doing their work. I don't have a lot of time to go into the ERs, but I encourage you to read a report that I co-authored and that was published last week that specifically goes into this question of the ERs and how they're positioned right now. And I think for the moment, this is probably enough, and we could pick up on some of these points later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm keeping an eye on the time. I would like to go back to the panelists with, based on, you know, Sarah, you shared some positive experiences and what is working. If it's enough, we all know the answer to that, but there are possibilities. And in the conversation that we're having here, to engage on Sudan, to put the spotlight on Sudan, I would like Reem, Michiel, and then if we have time, Shazir and Marie also to come on. What do you think is needed to avoid it to be a forgotten or neglected crisis? So Reem, please go ahead. What would you, in a brief way, want to call for?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I just definitely want to reiterate to what Sarah was saying about the infrastructure that we have to protect at all costs. I mean, because this is an organic infrastructure of like young men and young women and committees and professional unions and emergency groups and resistance committees and different organic structures, that this is really the revolutionary infrastructure. This is what we are left with from this revolution that failed on the political front. So this has to be protected. It has to be strengthened. This infrastructure has to remain organic because it's really about how it engages with the community, and it engages based on, you know, the different neighborhood structures, because the Sudan neighborhoods are divided based on, you know, for example, professions. You have neighborhoods for teachers, for journalists, for soldiers, for traders, and so on. So having it as an organic network makes it makes it easy for it to reach back into its community, to fundraise and to understand who needs help and what are their needs. And this is all very important. But protection is a big issue. I mean, right now, there is a very uncomfortable word that we have been hearing, which is collaborator. And in the beginning, collaborator was used to describe mostly a young man or young woman who were collaborating with the, you know, RSF militia, in the sense that they are leading them to houses of people, and that then, and as a result, they get hurt, they get killed, or something bad happens to them. But right now, the word collaborator is being used very loosely to describe pretty much all the any activist who's or someone who's active and who's moving around in Khartoum, and this is very dangerous. So how can we think of a situation where those young activists who are doing the work of basically the institutions, who are doing the work of the state, and who are doing this work at a very effective level, are protected, and they're not just branded as collaborators, because this makes them a target for both sides. So definitely protection is the big thing that we should talk about, and that those people should not be targeted. The other thing is also to just continue listening to the voices of the people. I am very you know, frustrated right now that there is a peace process that is happening that does not include the stakeholders. It does not include the people who have been displaced. It does not include women. It does not include youth. It does not include anyone other than the RSF and SAF. So how can you know, organizations and the international community pressure to make sure that this is a process that includes the stakeholders, because we are the ones who understand what it takes. We are the ones who have been impacted by this war, and we're able to better articulate our needs, you know, and what kind of process would be able to really you know, make our city safe again for people to be able to return, because the majority of us, we don't have plan Bs. You know, the only thing we want is to just go back to our homes. We do not want to be a burden on any organization. We do not want to receive any aid. We do not want to have to migrate. We want to go back to our homes. And this is really what matters. And this is why we have to be part of this process.
Thank you, Reem, for expressing that loud and clear. Michiel, what would you like to see happen, or what do you think is necessary?
First of all, I want to thank Sarah for giving a very clear picture of what this looks like, especially in Khartoum with what we call the volunteers, but these are in fact these different groups, and especially the emergency rooms that have kept most of the healthcare alive in Khartoum. And we've always realized from the start that what we contribute is mostly on the surgical side and more difficult to organize type of medical activities. So that is indeed true. And the organic nature actually is now a very important part of that because international NGOs, but even officially registered national NGOs, they have the same constraints that are being blocked to bring medications in Khartoum by the Sudanese military authorities, whilst their organic setup enables them to have more informal channels of supply that we can't access as an official organization. So in fact, what is keeping Khartoum alive now is those informal channels also in terms of supply that the emergency rooms are able to organize. So thanks for highlighting that. For me, there is a lot of things about the humanitarian consequences that are entirely avoidable. On the government side, it's clearly the unnecessary and deliberate restrictions that are being put on the humanitarian assistance in terms of the medical blockade on Khartoum, in terms of the assistance to the displaced being blocked because they don't want to make them permanent. On the RSF side, it's mainly to do with their respect and behavior towards civilians, towards humanitarians, and all of that. And they are not lone actors. There are international states. I don't like to call on the international community because that doesn't exist, because it's like saying somebody do something, you know, but we can be very precise there. The governments like the United States and Saudi Arabia, they have leverage over the Sudanese government. States like the Emirates and a few others, they have leverage over the RSF, and at this moment they are choosing not to use that leverage to at least pressure them for the avoidable and unnecessary restrictions on humanitarian aid and protection issues that you rightly highlighted. And in Khartoum, that was a huge issue, and one of the main reasons that people wanted working in the hospital, international staff present in the hospital, because they felt it gave them a little bit of protection by having non-Sudanese being the front facing towards the RSF in multiple incidents that we had of harassment threats both towards patients and towards staff. But yes, I do acknowledge this is a huge problem that this is on top of everything else that we've already mentioned.
Thanks, Michiel. Choosing to engage. Shazir, you want to add something? What do you see is needed? What you want to call for?
Might be this applies to Sudan as well as to the other armed conflicts. For the protection of healthcare structures and medical workers. Once we can achieve that with access to supplies, we can, it's a giant leap in terms of providing medical care to these civilians who are caught in the crossfire or, let's say, involved, not of their choosing. Thank you.
Access is a word I hear. I will, Reem, a quick call. What would you like to call out for? And then I'll look at Dushka to see if there's any question that maybe we can bring to the group before we close up. Reem, a quick, short, clear call from your side.
I would like to talk about one of the questions that I see. It's about the possibility of a political solution, and there needs to be a political solution, okay? But I want to talk about how there's a political solution and there's also a peace process. If we're talking about a peace process, I don't think we need a holistic peace process, because right now there are a number of conflicts that are happening. There is the larger conflict between the RSF and the National Army that is affecting different states, but there are also different levels of community or communal or tribal conflicts that are happening, especially in parts of Darfur. And this also needs to be dealt with within this holistic framework. Why I am saying there are different conflicts, because right now we have different groups that are allied with the RSF, for example, militias that are fighting with other groups, armed groups in Darfur. We also have tribes that are right now fighting, and so it's basically a war within a war situation in Darfur. So a political solution is a must, but we need a peace process that is tailored to deal with all the different levels of conflict that is happening on the ground.
Thank you so much. Then we see another question that I think very much speaks to why we are here together, why we are engaging, where a person is asking, just to clarify, Sudan conflict forgotten by whom? The donors, the international non-governmental organizations, UN or non-UN, the media, all of the above. So is there in the panel, Marie, Michiel, Rim, just who wants to call to that? Forgotten by whom? Michiel, I see you move forward.
Yes, for the media for sure, and that is very obviously also the Gaza effect, which is partially understandable because it is obviously also horrific. But for me, it's also what, like I already said, the diplomatic states and forces that can actually influence this, but choose not to. They choose to leave this be. I don't think it's not the donors. That is not the main issue. And many places we say, oh, there's not enough money for this conflict, but that is not the main issue, and it's not the United Nations. I actually find the United Nations being quite vocal still about Sudan as well, surprisingly so. But it's certainly the diplomats choose to not expand any political capital on using their leverage to find a solution.
Thanks. Sarah, you want to comment on that? Forgotten, neglected by whom?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree about this analysis. I think what's very critical is I don't think I mean, I think the Gaza effect is definitely there, but I think this has been going on since April, and so the neglect is long-standing beyond that as well. I think what's very important is that we have to look at the situation. There's kind of an idea that Sudan is very difficult. So, what do we do in such a difficult context? And it's really critical that we look at the different zones within this crisis. There are areas that have entry points that are not at the moment being utilized because there isn't the willpower to utilize them. And so it's extremely important to look, and one of those zones, by the way, are the people who are displaced. I see that in one of the questions. The neighboring countries, which was also mentioned by some of the speakers, people are not really getting any support there. But there are also areas where access is easier, areas where access is more difficult. So what we're really lacking is a really comprehensive strategy backed by a sustained commitment and built on partnerships between the international organizations, between the national organizations, and the local initiatives in order to respond in a tailored way based on the entry points and barriers that exist in different places.
Thank you. I don't know, Marie, do you want to comment on any of these last points and forgotten by whom?
I think, sorry.
It's okay, we hear you.
Do you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Yeah, the best for, I think, from everyone in general, because since the beginning, you know, this crisis was not on the news, on the newspaper, so not like Ukraine in the beginning or Gaza now. So yeah, and despite that, the population have very been affected, and what we have to call it for the protection of the population, because it's not normal that local markets are shelling, and there is a total young generation who are totally lost, because the volunteer that we spoke about, it's all educated people who has to stop the university. So it's like young generation totally lost, and it will affect the next year of the economy. So the call for the protection for the population in general, I think it's the major thing, and to allow the people to go in the school also, not only access to the healthcare. It's like the whole system in general.
Reem, you want to have a last comment on the forgotten by whom? No, I think we see there are some other questions about neighboring countries. We don't have necessarily answers, but we will respond to all of the questions and the comments. I think our time is up. I would like to thank everybody who joined, to take a moment to put the spotlight on Sudan, to engage, to listen, to learn in all of our different capacities, to hopefully do something towards making it better, step by step, engaging, including. And I'm not going to try to summarize everything, but I would like to invite us all to continue to remain engaged also on Sudan, and not to forget or neglect. Thank you, everybody. This conference, this exchange will be available on the website of MSF in Belgium, which is attiré.be or msf.be. And thank you, and we'll keep you posted on the next one, which will come in spring next year. All the best, and thank you, all of our speakers and participants, and all of you listening here in the room and online. See you for the next time. Bye.
Thank you.